ratio. Then we broke down here within Shambly, households in that, and then we showed you what the affordability bands are for those income ranges. So you can understand when we start talking about what's affordable to a household of 30% of AMI, which earns about $23,300. There are about 1,800 of those households here in the city. They can afford up to about $583 a month in rent based on cost burdening, if you understand that concept, or they could purchase up to $90,000 going through an FHA loan. So obviously those are more modest numbers, and then the higher the income, the more their ability to pay is. But we wanted to make sure they had an understanding as you look through all this analysis, and I'm sure you're going to spend countless hours reviewing it to make sure that you're up to speed on what we talk about. So some of the big things that we learned. Number one is affordability is a big problem, okay? What you're looking at here are graphics for both owner households and renter households based on how many of them are cost burdened or have to spend more than 30% of their gross income on housing to be able to live here in the city of Chamblee. And as of no surprise, the lower the income, which is over to the left side of the screen, the more cost burdening there is, which is the darker colors. The red is their cost burden between 30% and 50%, and then the brown is their cost burden over 50%. So imagine however much money you make a month, you have to spend more than half of that just for your housing. And then you have to figure out how you're going to pay for all the other ways you're going to live: food, clothing, medicine, all the basic essentials of life, let alone, you know, the more discretionary spending that you want to do. And so this is just an understanding of where we land. And what's no surprise here are households that earn below 80% of AMI, or that $62,000 range, have struggled with able to find housing that is price appropriate or allows them not to be cost burdened within the city of Chamblee. Now, and we don't show this, but I will say this has gotten exponentially worse over time, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But this is not just a Chamblee problem. I know one of the conversations that we had was, well, how do we compare? And so we looked at a number of your neighboring communities. You can see here Brookhaven has a similar problem, as does Doraville, as does Dunwoody. And so, you know, a lot of things we heard anecdotally through this process is, well, you know, even if it's not affordable in Chamblee, the places like Doraville are more affordable. Well, you can see here, no, they're really not. This is a regional problem of which we are one part of it, but the reality is it's something that we are involved in right now and is a real concern, not just for the future growth of the community, but for folks who are living here right now. And we also looked at Sandy Springs. The next major finding is that Chamblee is very expensive, and it has become even more expensive than it historically has been. The graphics you're looking at, and the only things I want to really point out is your existing single-family homes and new construction family homes have increased by between 80 and 100% in value over the past 10 years. So if you look at the graphic, the existing homes, which is the orange, the average median sale price in 2012 was about $260,000 for an existing unit, something that has been built prior to 2012. It's over $460,000 today, just 10 years later. New construction was about $540,000 10 years ago. Now it's close to $1 million per unit for the median sale price. And so Chamblee has become very, very expensive. And it's not just on the ownership side. You can see on the rental side, and the big takeaway from that is you can see the median rent in Chamblee is actually now higher than the median rent for the entire Atlanta MSA. So we have went from being substantially less expensive, $956 10 years ago, to almost $150 higher than the Atlanta MSA. We have become a very expensive community. Part of that is rent escalation in our existing units, but also that is the number of new rental units that have come on the market that are priced exclusively at the luxury market, and I'll show you why that's going on in just a moment. So we looked at looking at both from an ownership and from a rental perspective. This is not unique to the city of Chamblee, and I want to be very clear about that. This is not something that is only going on here. What you're looking at here is median sales prices within the Atlanta metro region over the last 5 years, and you can see line going up as you get closer to the year is from an affordability perspective, is a bad thing. We went from somewhere between $180,000 to $200,000 to $300,000 to $360,000 across the entire MSA, which includes many of those counties that are pretty far outside the perimeter. So we're not just looking at, what I like to call the big four, which is Dekalb, Fulton, Cobb, and Gwinnett. This includes the entire 15-county region, and you can see how prices are escalating everywhere. Once again, there really isn't a lot of relief, particularly close to Shambly, but region-wide, housing prices are escalating substantially faster than people's ability to earn. So we looked at, this is showing you the affordability gap here in the city by income group. And so the two main takeaways here are, you can see that for the most vulnerable of the households, less than 50% of AMI, we have substantially more households than we have units that are affordable to them. And so those are the folks that are severely cost burdened that we talked about earlier. The other part that is an important takeaway is you can see how underserved we are at the highest end of the marketplace. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's showing that Chamblee has become much more attractive to affluent buyers. What that does is that creates downward pressure on the markets because they have a greater affordability to pay, so they see Chamblee as an affordable alternative, which is the reason why you're seeing those price escalations go up so fast, because they can pay for that because they want the access to being inside the perimeter, they want the access to MARTA, and so it's creating a affordability challenge, not just for new folks that want to be in the city of Chamblee, but for the folks that are already here. They're going to find it harder and harder to be able to live here. And so one of the comments that we heard through the survey that we did was, well, I own a house now, but if I sold it, what I could sell it for, I couldn't buy a new house. And so they feel like they're stuck where they are because they don't have the ability, they may want a larger home, but they can't afford one, so they continue to stay where they are. Once again, this is not a good or bad thing, but it's a reality when you look at from an affordability and from an access and from a diversity perspective, it's a challenge that we run into. I mentioned the survey that we took. These are folks that have responded to the survey. The vast majority of them were owners, which in its own right was a little bit concerning to us because it means that we're not getting as good penetration to understand the issues that renter households are finding. However, the big takeaway here is of the 84 respondents to the survey of about 400 that we got that were looking to buy a home, 70% of them are saying they're facing challenges. The biggest issues are the houses here are just too expensive for what they can afford, or they don't have the financial resources to be able to put a down payment, which is mostly because the housing prices are too high for what they can afford. And so once again, when you look at it from an implementation perspective, as we're going to start getting into, this is an opportunity if the city chooses to go down that route of how you help folks that are here in the community, whether they're owners looking to upgrade or folks who are renting here that are looking to become owners. There are serious challenges for them to continue to be part of your community. And this is, once again, I want to make sure that we are clear. This is not something that is unique to the city of Chamblee. This is something that that is rampant throughout Metro Atlanta. And while we recognize that the city of Chamblee is not going to be able to solve the Metro region's issues, from an implementation perspective, this is just something to consider as we decide what we want to do about the issues that we're facing. So here you're looking at national trends in rent. So we're transitioning from the ownership discussion to the rental discussion, and you can see here that median rents nationwide are going up while vacancies are going down, which is the red line, which frankly is a double negative because as fewer units are available, prices then will continue to escalate even further. And we can see here, and this is a more detailed graphic of what we saw earlier which, in terms of rent escalation for the city of Chamblee. We are not alone in that issue. Now, we have escalated faster than just about everywhere else than other communities, mostly because we have seen the greatest amount of new construction growth. But rent escalation is not a Chamblee problem. It's not a DeKalb County problem. It's a regional problem. And even though we have built quite arguably a substantial amount of rental housing, it hasn't addressed or hasn't even moved the needle in terms of price affordability because demand is so much higher than supply that's available. Here's to look at that same affordability graphic that I showed you earlier. Once again, you have a lot of issues at the lower end, and you have a lot of unmet demand at the higher end, which is starting to create some of the issues that you run into. Anecdotally, through the public outreach meetings that we had existing tenants from here in Chamblee saying, my rent 5 years ago was $900 a month, and now it's $1,500 a month. That's substantial, and most people's incomes aren't increasing that fast over a 5-year period. And so once again, it becomes an issue of affordability and an issue of access, an issue of equity for our community, not just for folks who may want to be here because this is a desirable place to be, but for the folks who are already here, that already call Shambly their home. And once again, we looked at this, we wanted to make sure that we gave you the information, not just a Shambly issue. This is the same graphic for Dorville, a very similar breakdown, and for Brookhaven, excuse me. So the next finding is around equity and inclusion, and we're looking at that from an analytical perspective to understand how is housing affordability affecting different residents of the community, or is it affecting different residents of the community differently? So one of the big findings we found when we did the equity inclusion is the vast majority of growth of your population is minority population. Not a good or bad thing, but a reality from a factual perspective of Chamblee is already a diverse community, and it continues to diversify. And the reason why that's important is when we looked at households by race and by their income is non-white households tend to not have the same financial resources as white households, all things being equal, here in Chamblee and here in the Metro Atlanta region. And so once again, that's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but as we continue to diversify, price diversity in your housing is going to create more and more affordability issues for people who are already living here in your community. When we looked at the other component from the equity perspective is historically, and this is a national thing, not a Chamblee thing, is the ability to build wealth and income has continued to diverge between white and non-white households since the 60s, and probably before that, this is just when they started tracking the information. And so from the standpoint of Chamblee continuing to be a diverse and accessible community to all different peoples and all different walks of their life, not only are we being challenged from a supply-demand perspective, is that also because we are such a diverse community, it's accentuated here, if you will. The other component, we looked at it from a DEI perspective, is we wanted to look at job creation here in the city of Chamblee and understand what folks who are working here and the jobs that are being created here pay. And this is a lot of information for me to say 6 of the 10 largest employment sectors in Chamblee pay less than 80% on average of the AMI for the Atlanta metro region. 6 of the 10 fastest growing sectors here in Chamblee pay less than 80% of the regional AMI. So Chamblee is creating employment opportunities, they're creating a diversity of employment opportunities, but we aren't creating the diversity in the housing in what's being constructed at the same pace, which then plays into what we talked about earlier, which is the price escalation and how it's creating challenges. So while we're creating new jobs here, those 6 of the 10 employment sectors, folks that work in that sector, are struggling and will struggle to find price-appropriate housing. So they're going to have a choice. They have to live further away from work, which clogs up the roads that everybody's already gravely concerned about, have to spend more of their money on transportation costs to be able to get to their job, and creates a negative economic reason for businesses to be here, because if their workers have to commute from such a far away, then they may start looking at, well, where can I put my business where people can afford to live? And that's oftentimes a decision point, particularly for smaller companies, which is going to be more in the wheelhouse of what Chamblee can get based on the size of our real estate assets and the types of buildings and product that we have. So implications, boiling all that back, while there is a differential between the incomes of renters and owners, and that is nothing new to any community, owners tend to have more resources, and that's how they're able to own. Cost burdening affects both. And it's substantial, particularly as you get below that 80% of IMR, that $62,000 a year for that household. We are continuing to become more unaffordable, despite the efforts that we've done, which are admirable compared to, frankly, some of our neighbors in terms of housing development. We continue to become less affordable, and it's going to continue to escalate. Frankly, being inside the perimeter and the gravity, as I like to call it, of the city of Atlanta has pushed to us and now pushing beyond us. That is going to continue to escalate because we have locational access, which is desirable for folks who are working downtown, midtown, Buckhead. And it's continued to become unaffordable for the majority of our existing residents. And that's the part I think I want to stress the most is we're not talking about some hypothetical person who may want to come to Chamblee. These are people who have made Chamblee their home, many of them for decades. You know, like I said, when we had the public input process, there were a number of folks that said, I've been renting here for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. These are folks who are long-term residents of the community that are struggling to be able to stay here and continue to be part of a community that they made their home. And the market's not going to address it. The reality is there's so much unmet demand at the highest end, the for-profit development community is going to build where they're going to maximize their return. And part of it is because land value is going to continue up because someone else is able to pay more because they're going to be able to develop all market rate units, and so they're forced to escalate their bids, which then forces them to go after the highest available marketplace so they're able to make their return. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the reality is for-profit development is exactly that. Everybody who owns a business, a for-profit business, is trying to maximize their return, and that's the way the market works. However, you know, if left to their own devices, this issue is going to get worse and not better here in the city of Chamblee. And so we're going to be talking about in the near future, recommendations are going to have to be across the board. There are going to have to be some regulatory strategies that we're going to be talking about as options for the city, financial strategies, market strategies, and we're going to be putting these on the table to engage with you, with the working group. We're going to have a public meeting in May to try and get feedback before we finalize what the recommendations are from RKG that we encourage the city to do based on trying to address the housing issues that we have. And to that point, and I want to make sure before I wrap up is that the issues are too great to solve them all, and the issues are too great to solve them all alone. So there's a whole level of partnership that's going to have to go on, and part of the reason why Bob is part of the team is Bob has over 25 years experience in both affordable housing development and affordable housing coalition building, and so he is working with us to try and identify who those partners are so that we can leverage what resources we're willing to put on the table to increase the yield. But we're going to have to talk about what are the priorities that we have, because we're not going to be able to do everything we need to do in production, preservation, rehabilitation, special needs, all the different avenues where there is unmet need. We're just not going to be able to solve it all here in the city of Chamblee. Even for the existing, just the Chamblee residents, we're just not going to have the resources. I don't have an exact number, but I can guarantee you it's multiples of what your current annual budget is to be able to address all those needs. And so the conversation as we move forward is, yes, we need the menu of options in front of us, but we're going to have to start making decisions of how we're going to prioritize, which ones we're going to pursue first, and then if more resources come available second, or how do we want to disperse our resources knowing that we can't really solve any one of those issues wholly, if that makes any sense. And just to some of the responses we heard, just to give you a preview of what the community said back to us through the survey was, they almost 70% of the respondents said they believe the city should play an active role, and I thought that's an important point to bring. So this is something that those who took the time to respond to the housing survey that we implemented, and it was open for almost 2 months or over 2 months, said yes, they largely believe that the city should be playing some sort of role, and you can see here some of the ways that they would like to see the city get more engaged. And they also indicated that, you know, while there is that diversity in the community of where this development, right, because we also asked them that, they recognize that around MARTA, around downtown, along the commercial corridors is the predominant. The one I will bring to attention, which actually was a little bit of a surprise to me, is 17% of the respondents actually believe that in existing single-family residential areas, the city should be doing something to try and address the housing affordability issue, which is fantastic. Many communities, it's much lower than that. And in fact, many communities, they say, leave our existing neighborhoods alone, and I'm sure there's a number of folks that believe that. But the folks that did participate did recognize that there's a role to play for all the areas of the city. And it's not the same role, mind you, and we recognize that, and we're very sensitive to it, but that was something that came out of the survey that I thought was interesting. And only 4% said nothing. Don't do anything, which I thought was great, right? You're never going to please everybody, right? There's an adage, you can please some of the people all the time and all the people some of the time, but you can't please all the people all the time. And so I'm not terribly surprised, but it was an encouraging response and a thoughtful response from the citizens who did participate in the housing study. So with that, that was the highlights of what we learned through the data analysis. And like I said, now we're in the process of starting to formulate some ideas for strategies that we'll bring back to you in our next conversations. But I'm happy to address any questions you may have related to where we are to this point.
You blew through the slide pretty quick, so I didn't have a chance to know. Did the survey indicate how they wanted Shambly to be proactive or active in the solving? I think it was a slide before this that said percentage of the citizens thought will play an active role. Do they give?
Well, so for one of the largest responses is to identify willing development partners. So find ways to bring developers who are willing to do housing price diversity project, affordable housing developers, nonprofit developers. That was the number one, right? They recognized that the city can't fund it all on their own, or they didn't want the city to fund it all on their own. So the number one strategy was how do we identify partners to help us leverage the resources that we are going to put on the table. The lack of community support was around educational outreach and awareness to make people understand what we're trying to do, how we're going to do it, what it will look like. That's always a big sticking point for folks when you start talking theoretically about housing development. Sadly, many people's minds go to the worst possible image that they could conjure, and so they don't really understand how it looks. Identifying infrastructure capacity and access was another thing that people said. I think if I were to interpret based on some of the write-ins responses around transportation, right? How do we make sure that we're doing it in a manner that is hopefully aspirationally transportation impact neutral to the community. The zoning and regulatory opportunities, how do we rezone the land? How do we create more consistency and predictability in the development process so that it can reduce the cost of development, which then could create opportunities to create value so that affordability becomes less of a burden on the development, and then money. The reality is, and in talking to a number of those partners already through this process, we know that one of the best things a city can do is come up with some funding source, some funding strategy to put some skin in the game. And nobody we've talked to so far has said, oh, well, you need to pay for it all. But they're like, look, if the city's willing to put something up to help with the capital stack or the resources needed to make affordable housing. Yes, stuff like that.
Which one is that under?
It would be sufficiently funded development partners.
Yeah, see, that didn't jump out at me right off the bat, so I think the average citizen may not understand that they would be talking about tax incentives. Maybe they would. I don't know.
Well, I will say
But that might need to be, that's something that's kind of been a hot topic for us internally is tax incentives part of the affordable housing strategy.
Well,
it'd be nice to know where that lands.
Well, I will say through the public engagement process, particularly the outreach meetings that we've held, the reality is folks understand that the market, that you can't develop price-appropriate housing, lower-cost housing, without some sort of infusion from the public sector, whether that be through creating value through increased density so that I can increase the value of my development, or it's putting money into it, and whether it's a proactive cash infusion up front, or whether it's deferring future revenues to allow that to be part of the financial flow of the development. I would say, at least of the folks that we talk to directly, they understand that there is a financial. Now, whether they prefer the city to put $5 million on the table today or to defer $5 million of taxes over 10 or 15 or 20 years, we did not get into that conversation. But at least from the understanding of the folks that we were able to engage with, they understand that there's some sort of financial commitment to being part of creating and preserving housing diversity in your community.
I think the hot topic part came from next door, and I think that what makes tax incentives especially such a hot topic is you have to couple that with the NIMBYs. There are people that just close the doors, no more development, too many houses, don't cut the trees, blah, 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 and then how come my taxes are so high? Why are you giving tax incentives when my taxes are so high? Bring my taxes.
I would agree, but they're just people that are engaged, so I would
I
like to know how many of those folks would. I still don't see it in the scrap baby. I'm not where that's represented, like how many, you said the people you talk to are, what percentage of that are those folks that are willing to put some skin in the game or have some public dollars put into it, whether it's upfront behind or any form of fashion? Where is that on here? Are they a percentage? Are they all? Or?
Well, so when we asked them how you should do it, 12% of the respondents put sufficiently funded, so making sure you have financial resources available to make it happen. Now, that was amongst a number of different choices, and so I would argue that that wasn't the number one choice because maybe they saw other options as more desirable. So I can't say of the people who responded, 80% would say yes, because we didn't specifically isolate that as an option. We asked them what they thought the best option was. And however, to your point, the folks we talked to was not the same number of people. This was 400. I think the folks we talked to was in the dozens.
Right.
And so, you know, you're a city of 30,000 people.
Right.
And so I can't say for certain, you know, who said tax incentives or who would believe that tax incentives are a good idea. I would say that anybody who believes that the city should be engaged in preserving existing affordability and trying to promote the development of new affordability would be more than naive if they didn't realize that there was a financial component to that. I would be surprised if anyone who said, yes, do that, then didn't understand that there was also, now once again, what does that mean? Does it mean deferred taxes through an incentive, or does it mean a direct investment from the city? You know, there are many communities that have created housing opportunity funds through a bond issue, and that becomes the seed money, and so, but it's still money that is going to then come, the repayment of that bond comes out of the city coffers. And so anyone who I've ever talked to, I've been doing this for 23 years, 24 years. Bob, you've been doing this 1 or 2 years longer than I have. Will tell you that anyone who says, yes, we need to be an active player in creating housing diversity and housing choice in our community through price diversity, both in ownership and rental side, knows that there's a financial component to it.
So my last question is on the AMI. You mentioned the AMI number. That's you're using the same AMI number for the entire metro area, or are you using?
So
I would assume that Buckhead income is different than Brookhaven income, which is different than Shambly income, which is different than Dunwoody and Doraville.
Absolutely is.
So are you using the same AMI number for your charts, though?
Yes. So the regional number is defined by HUD for the entire Metro Atlanta region. And they do that because you have to be able to compare apples to apples, because HUD's not going to give money to Buckhead for their 50% of AMI, which may be our 150% of AMI. They want it. They try and average it out and say, okay, this region, the AMI is, I think it was like $77,600 for the Atlanta MSA region. So they only want to serve folks. Most federal programs are tied to either like 80% or 60% or 50%, and they want it to be a fair shake because incenting Buckhead's 50%, which I said is probably our 130%, doesn't really solve the problem. And so that's why they make, I'm just explaining why it's done that way rather than, now I will say that your AMI for the city of Chamblee per se is about 20-25% less than the regional AMI. So our number is about, so if it's $77,000, whatever, 20.
Here, MSA is 86 in here.
For 4-person households. Yes, yeah. So you're about 75% of the regional just for the city of Chamblee. So yes, on average, we have a lower median income than the rest of the region does. But when you're looking at housing programs and access to funds, they define it based off of that regional number, not the local number.
Right.
Now, if you wanted to create your own fund, you can define what those thresholds are, but you then run the risk of not being able to tie it in with other capital funds because they have to follow what those federal thresholds are.
So, but in your final report to us, I would like it if you would hammer out, I know you do this for a lot of other cities, I know you've seen a lot of different strategies. I would like to know every single opportunity that's on the table to us. I think when a lot of people think about incentives, their mind goes straight to abatement. And there's a lot of other incentives out there other than abatements. So I was talking with someone the other day in another city, and she was talking about federal grants that I'm not even aware of. So I know there's other opportunities for funding out there that we just don't know about. And so I want to know, what those might be, what we might need to do to go after some of that kind of stuff.
Yep.
I'm also curious, while you were doing this, have you seen COVID play a role in any changes here? Because I know a lot of folks, I'm in the service industry, and a lot of folks in my industry have seen substantial bumps in pay because, there's less folks on the market, so where a lot of places are paying more. So did rents go up as well? Or do folks have a little bit more discretionary income right now? I mean,
So from the supply side, rents have been continually going up. It's probably less due to the recent COVID bump than to just the supply and demand, and I know I can get it, so I'm going to do it perspective. So if I know that, I did my last rent increase at $150 a month, and I didn't lose any occupancy, I'm going to do $150 the next time. And these folks track the market regularly. Where I track it at a point in time, they're constantly looking and seeing what's available, and they know the information inside and out. And so they know when they're able to increase rents and when they're going to have to start looking at either providing concessions, like we'll give you 2 months rent if you sign a year lease, or they're going to actually have to start reducing their price. In rental market, I haven't seen a reduction in price anywhere in a very, very long time.
have you seen existing housing, like older housing prices, go up high at about the same rate as the new builds? I mean,
I would
in
say
comparison,
I would say it's a higher percentage
Exactly.
and probably a similar dollar amount. So if it went up $50 for a $1,000 rent, that's a higher percentage than $50 for a $2,000 rent.
Correct.
And so those are the areas where you generally see maybe the most fluctuation, is because when you have such a tight market like you do right now, they're the ones that are going to try and capitalize as long as they possibly can, because there's more demand. They're picking on a larger band of shopper than folks at the highest end, where maybe they only have 15% of the market share. Someone at the lowest end has 90% of the market share, and so they have more of a potential of landing somebody to their product. Now, there is a limit. Folks aren't going to spend $2,500 on a unit that isn't in good condition, doesn't have modern amenities, doesn't have a workout room, or doesn't have a quality pool.
But to your point, some folks can't get out either because they don't have the money for down payments on a new rental apartment.
Correct.
Or something. They're stuck in a cycle.
Correct. And worse than that is that they also, if the conditions aren't good, are more compelled to not say anything about it for fear of retribution.
That's true.
And so they're like, I can't afford to lose this place because there isn't anywhere else for me to live. Whereas if, let's say, I was renting and I wasn't happy with the way my apartment complex was running my apartment, I would complain about it. And if they said, you got to go, I said, well, I have choice, because I make enough money where I can go find another. There are other options for me, either here in the community or somewhere close by. Those folks, I call them the most vulnerable, and they're the most vulnerable because they're the ones with the least amount of choice and are spending more and more percentage of their income, and they don't have another place to go to. They're stuck. And that was, to your original question, is one of the effects of COVID is folks that couldn't pay rent, like short term, got kicked out of apartment complex A, folks that couldn't pay rent in apartment complex B, and so they flipped. And so there was some disruption, but it didn't change occupancy. Mm-hmm. And as a result, why you continue to see prices not be same fluctuation as the economic fluctuation that happened. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
It does. It's all very concerning, but I'm glad we're working hard and diligently and trying to address this. I know I've said, and I know everybody up here on council has said, anybody who wants to live in the city of Shambly, we want them to be able to afford to live here. And that might not seem like reality, but we're going to do our best to make it reality.
I would also like to have some time spent talking about building a regional approach to this,
mm-hmm.
how we could do that. Because I can't wrap my head around it. I mean, how can we work the door go?
Are our sister cities even aware that we've been working on this survey? Have they been a part of this in any way?
No, we spoke with the planning directors anyway, at the director level, staff level, yeah. And also, well, it's ARC funded, so it gets discussed that the grant was awarded to city.
And to your point, many of the solutions that are going to have the greatest impact are going to require more than just the city of Chamblee championing the strategies.
That's pretty much everything across the board.
So much of the federal dollars that flow to this community flow through Dekalb County.
Correct.
So a stronger relationship and a stronger partnership with them is going to be critical to get more and more access to those dollars, because they are looking at multiple municipalities and unincorporated areas. And so that's going to be one component of the regionalism. So working with your sister cities, working with the county, state has resources, so working with them. And then there's a number of nonprofit and private entities that are engaged in housing affordability and inclusion and equity, and bringing them to the table. Like I said, one of the things that Bob is going to do is try and help identify who those are, what their roles could be, and how we can best engage with them. And so part of this process will be, and I use the term leverage, right? If we're going to spend $1, our goal is not just to have $1 worth of new housing, but our goal is to multiply that 3, 5, 10, 20 by bringing the other partners who have, frankly, substantially more resources than we do, and sometimes expertise, to the table so that we can maximize our return. And so there's already a number of those that we have identified and we've communicated with, and Bob and I are going to go back and bang our heads together until we can figure out the best strategies we think that the city can consider for it to be able to move forward, so that it's not just about the money we spend, but it's about the money we spend to create a multiplier effect to benefit our residents and benefit our businesses.
So we're always told that the city of our size can only participate in some of these programs. Is there a next level of which, like a magic number, like 50,000?
Yes, that's the number.
What is it?
50,000. And it's because that,
Pull out of my...
at the time, so what happens at 50,000, in the eyes of the federal government, you become what's called a entitlement community, which means you get your own cut of the federal HUD funds, home programs, community development, block grant money. You get an allocation of that directly to you. That's only available to communities of 50,000 residents or more. And so if you could get 20,000 more people in your borders, then you get your own cut of that money to be able to use for housing programs if you so choose.
Somebody says, well, Brookhaven does this, Brookhaven does that. I think they hit that magic number. I think they're 52,000.
So Brookhaven does have an allocation. They're an entitlement community.
Yes, they are an entitlement community.
Yes, and so they do have an allocation, and so yes, there's that. But you have access to, through partnership with Dekalb County, who does get an appropriation, and you have access to, through partnership with the state, who does get an appropriation in those programs. Now, you have to engage on it and partner on it. They're not required to give it to you, whereas as an entitlement community, you get your own pot of money to use. So it requires a little bit more diplomacy and strategy, but there are resources out there that this community can get access to. Just, it's not a direct appropriation from the federal government.
Yeah, diplomacy is definitely Brian's. Not mine.
No, okay. Fair enough.
Stuff. Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Working. Yeah, appreciate it. All right, we'll move right on into the staff action items. First up under City Clerk is the approval of minutes from the public hearing work session February the 10th.
Do I have a microphone working?
Yep.
I probably don't need it. Motion to approve the minutes for the, where am I? Wait a minute. Public hearing work session, February,
Yeah.
as submitted.
Anybody want to? All right, have a motion and a second. All in favor? That approved unanimously. City Council regular meeting February the 15th.
Motion to, I'm looking, I swear I saw January on here. Motion to approve the minutes from the regular meeting, February meeting, as submitted by staff. Thank you.
Second.
Have a motion and a second, all in favor? Very good. Item number 2, the Downtown Development Authority appointments.
Motion to defer this to the April work session.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to defer this item to the April work session, all in favor? Very good. Under City Manager, we have Gov Pilot Services Agreement.
I'd like to make a motion authorizing the mayor to sign an agreement with GovPilot for the new service automation system for the city.
Second.
A motion and a second to authorize the mayor to sign an agreement with GovPilot for new service automation system. All in favor? Very good. Next up is the HDL Service Agreement Amendment.
I'd like to make a motion authorizing the mayor to sign a service agreement amendment with HDL.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to authorize the mayor to sign an amendment with HDL Service Agreement as submitted. All in favor? Very good. Next up is the Video Streaming Services Agreement.
I'd like to make a motion authorizing the mayor to sign an agreement with Swagger Productions to provide video streaming services for city meetings.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to authorize the mayor to sign an agreement with Swagger Productions LLC for video streaming services with the city. All in favor? Very good. And last up under City Manager, we have an award of the 2022 paving program.
Motion to award the 2022 paving program contract to Atlanta Paving and Concrete Construction Incorporated as recommended by Kimley Horn.
Second.
Very good. We have a motion and a second to award the 2022 paving program contract to Atlanta Paving and Concrete Construction as recommended by Kimley Horn. All in favor? Very good. Under Development Department, first item up is 4253 Shambly Dunwoody Road.
Motion to approve as submitted.
Second.
All right, we have a motion to approve as submitted and a second. All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have 3 in favor, 1 abstention. Next item up, 2344 Perimeter Park Drive Variances and Waivers.
Motion to approve with conditions of 2 variances and 1 waiver. Motion to approve the variance and waiver requests for this project.
Second.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve with conditions the 2 variances and the waiver for this project. All in favor? That is unanimous. Next up is 2197 Urbandale Drive Fence Variances.
Motion to approve the 2 variances with 1 condition. There is a gap in the shrubbery, right where the bike racks are. Could you finish filling in that gap between the 2 lengths of shrubbery so that we don't see that fence from any angle?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the 2 variances with the conditions as laid out by Mayor Pro Tem Robson. All in favor? Very good. And we have 5077 Peachtree Road Variances and Waivers.
Motion to approve as recommended with staff and the following additional condition. The applicant shall provide an enhanced stormwater management plan to address runoff flow that is possible to control on the site, including roof and runoff technologies, and a good faith proposal to the railroad to lift existing pavement area and pavement area comprising a minimum of 2 parking spaces. The latter effort shall be documented within 6 months and prior to CO work agreed to by the railroad shall be conducted prior to CO.
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second to approve with staff conditions as well as additional conditions as read by Councilman Mesa. All in favor? Very good. And you'll get that to the city clerk? Thank you. All right, under Police Department, we have CPD Viewpoint Health Co-Responder Program.
Motion to approve the Chamblee Police Department Viewpoint Co-Responder Program.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the MOU with Viewpoint Health. All in favor? That's unanimous. Under Public Works, we have the Public Works Facility Upgrade.
I'd like to make a motion authorizing the mayor to sign the agreement with Reeves and Young for the design-build services for the locker room renovations at the Public Works Building.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to authorize the mayor to sign an agreement with Reeves and Young for the design and build services for locker room renovations at Public Works. All in favor? Good. Under Community Engagement, we have a website services agreement.
Motion to authorize the mayor to execute a website service agreement with Revise to build a new website for the city of Chamblee.
Second.
Very good. We have a motion and a second to authorize the mayor to sign the web services sales agreement with Revise. All in favor? Very good. I think we have a couple of first reads this evening. First up is the Stormwater Management Ordinance Amendment.
Motion to allow the city attorney to read headings only.
Second.
Very good.
An ordinance to amend the Code of Ordinances of the City of Chamblee, Georgia, Appendix A, Unified Development Ordinance Type 3, Development and Permitting, and for all other lawful purposes. Be it ordained, and it is hereby ordained by the Mayor and City Council of the City of Chamblee, Georgia, that the provisions of the Unified Development Ordinance be amended as follows. Findings. The Mayor and City Council make the following findings. The city is authorized by the Georgia Constitution to provide stormwater collection and disposal. The Federal Clean Water Act and rules promulgated by the EPA emphasize the role of local governments in developing and funding stormwater programs. Stormwater management services and facilities will assist the city in meeting the regulatory obligation imposed upon it. The city presently owns and operates stormwater management system and facilities, which have been developed over many years. The future usefulness of the existing stormwater systems owned and operated by the city and of additions and improvement rests on the ability of the city to effectively manage, protect, control, regulate, use, and enhance stormwater systems. And the city must have adequate and stable funding for stormwater management. Stormwater management services and facilities are needed throughout the city because most of those areas are developed. The provision of stormwater management services and facilities in the city promotes an essential regulatory purpose by controlling where stormwater runoff flows. Stormwater management services and facilities will provide a specific service to property owners by assisting in the property owner's legal obligations to control stormwater runoff. The city is responsible for the protection and preservation of the public health, safety, and welfare of the city and finds it's in best interest of the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of the city to proceed with development of a stormwater management. The city has undertaken a comprehensive review by staff and professional consultants of the need for management funding of a stormwater utility. The city finds that a stormwater utility provides the most practical and appropriate means of delivering stormwater management services and facilities, and finds that a utility fee provides the most practical and appropriate means of funding it. Establishment of a utility and enterprise fund. There is hereby established a stormwater management utility within the city, which shall be responsible for stormwater management throughout the city's corporate limits and provide for management, protection, control, regulation, use, and enhancement of stormwater systems and facilities. The utility shall be under the direction of a stormwater utility director appointed by the Planning and Development Director. The Planning and Development Director shall establish a stormwater enterprise fund in the city budget and accounting system separate and apart from its general fund. Scope of responsibility, the City Council hereby transfers to the Stormwater Utility Director operational control over the existing stormwater management system and facilities owned and operated by the city. Scope of responsibility for the drainage system in the city. The city drainage system consists of all rivers, streams, creeks, branches, lakes, reservoirs, ponds, drainage ways, channels, ditches, etc. Within the political boundaries of the city owns or has legal access for purposes of operation, maintenance, and improvements to those segments of this system which are located within public streets, rights-of-way, and easements, are subject to easements, rights-of-way, rights of access, rights of use, or other permanent provision for adequate access for operation, are located on public lands to which the city has adequate access for operation, maintenance, and/or improvement. Operation and maintenance of stormwater systems and facilities located on private property or public property not owned by the city, and for which there has been no dedication of such systems, shall be and remain the legal responsibility of the property owner. And the city expressly reserves the right to assert all available immunities and defenses in any action seeking to impose monetary damages upon the city. Stormwater service fees established. In order to fully recover the cost of providing stormwater services and facilities, the city has set forth a stormwater service charge which shall be established by resolution and set forth in a fee schedule kept and maintained by the office of the city clerk. Exemptions and credits applicable to stormwater service charges. Except as provided in this section, no public or private property shall be exempt from stormwater utility service charges or receive a credit or offset against such charges. And no exception, credit, offset, or other reduction shall be granted based on age, tax, economic status, race, religion of the customer, or other condition unrelated to the utilities cost. The following properties are exempt: undeveloped land, all public rights-of-way, railroad rights-of-way, any property whereby 100% of the stormwater runoff is contained on the premises and no runoff enters into the stormwater management system. Developed land, which by reason of topography discharges stormwater onto land or property which does not lie within the jurisdictional limits of the city. Credits are available based on the following. Credits are available to property owners of developed land who may receive a stormwater service charge credit for on-site systems or facilities. And these service charge credits are determined based on technical requirements, design, and performance standards contained in the 2016 edition of the Georgia Stormwater Management Manual. A 10% credit for on-site systems or facilities sized and functioning to meet water quality according to the Shambly Code. 10% credit for an on-site system or facility sized and functioned to meet the channel protection in accordance with Shambly's code. 10% credit for on-site systems or facility sized and functioning to meet the overbank flood protection in accordance with City of Chamblee code. 10% credit for on-site systems sized and functioning to meet the extreme flood protection properly in accordance with Chamblee code. It sets forth a method by which property owners can seek these credits, and upon receipt of a timely filed completed application, the Chief Executive Officer or his designee will review the application and make a determination, and it sets forth any conditions upon which any credit allowed is conditioned on, and it sets forth several conditions. The city may revoke any credit at any time for non-compliance with this article. And it is declared the intention of the mayor and city council that any provision of this ordinance, or that this ordinance, all the provisions are severable, and any provision that is declared to be unconstitutional, all the remaining provisions will stand.
Very good. Any discussion on this item? All right.
Well, there weren't any headings, unfortunately.
That item will move to second read. Next up is the amendment to the alcohol ordinance, specifically tap rooms.
An ordinance to amend the Code of Ordinances for the City of Shambly, Georgia, alcoholic beverages, and for all other lawful purposes. The City of Shambly is charged with providing for the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens. The city regulates the sale of alcoholic beverages. The city desires to amend the alcohol ordinance to provide local licensing options for beer and wine retailers that maintain and sell a wide variety of such beverages on tap for consumption on the premises. And the mayor and city council have determined that amending the city's alcoholic beverage ordinance is in the best interest of the public's health, safety, and welfare. Part 1, the provisions of Section 1 will be amended by adding a definition of taproom. Part 2, retail sales of alcoholic beverages for consumption on the premises shall be amended to read as follows. It defines a tap room. A tap room that is licensed under this section may sell and deliver alcoholic beverages to a customer for consumption on the premises only between the hours of 9 a.m. and 11:59 p.m., Monday through Saturday, and a tap room must close its premises to the public and clear its premises by 12:30 a.m. the following day. It sets forth specifications that must be included in an application for a tap room. It shall be unlawful for a tap room or tap room employee to knowingly or recklessly allow any person to consume on the tap room premises any alcoholic beverage that was dispensed into a growler or other multi-serving container. Notwithstanding, wine that is dispensed at a licensed tap room into a growler or similar container and sealed such that it will be apparent if the container has been substantially opened or tampered with, and that is sold to a customer for off-premises consumption may be removed from the licensed premises by the customer. And a tap room that holds a license to sell malt beverages or wine is not eligible to sell distilled spirits. It is the intention of the mayor and city council that all the sections and parts of this ordinance are severable, and if any part or section is declared unconstitutional, the remaining phrases and parts will stand.
Very good. Any discussion on this item? All right, I believe this item will move to second read as well. And
That, we're working on both of those.
yeah, thanks so much. And John, I believe we discussed earlier on second read, we can define the zoning areas, or did we already do that in this?
That was done in this. However, we will be proposing an additional amendment to the UDO to capture that in the zoning codes.
Okay, perfect. All right, next item up is the Peachtree Creek Greenway. I believe that's Councilman first item.
Yep. Motion to direct staff to generate easements as LOIs are submitted by the Peachtree Creek Greenway.
Second.
Good, we have a motion and a second to direct staff as stated by Councilman first.
I'd like to make a friendly amendment. I'd like to make a friendly amendment.
All right, come on.
I would also like to just include the study that was done and commend the Peachtree Creek Greenway Group for doing such a comprehensive study. It's a beautiful presentation. So combine that with what you just said, if that's okay.
Yes.
All right.
Any further discussion on this item? Thank you, Councilman. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. All right, we have a motion and a second with a friendly amendment by Councilwoman Robson. All in favor? Very good. Next up, we have citizen comment. This is your opportunity to come to the microphone. You have 3 minutes to tell us anything that is on your mind. If you'll state your name and your address, and I see you've already filled out the card for the city clerk. Love it.
Thank you, Mayor Mock.
Yes,
Good
sir.
to see you again, council members. Again, I'm John Barnes, president of Peachtree Malone Association, representing the 132 property owners at Peachtree Malone Lofts. On March 9th, our association sent you letters, and last Thursday's public work session, I presented the issues of that letter. We hope our request will soon be approved. As it has not yet been, I'm here again tonight. Our association and its members remain exceptionally concerned about the city's consideration to condemn a portion of our property. Hundreds of thousands of dollars are in play, all to construct a small portion of the rail trail, which contradicts the safety and leadership group recommendations from the city's own engineering study. Eminent domain is a serious matter that we ask to bring out into the open and be discussed in public at these council meetings. Our members deserve to hear this discussion and to know who is voting to condemn their property and why. The city has options. The engineers identified not just one, but 2 other routes to go around our property, and the leadership group recommended to avoid our property. Simply put, the city does not need Peachtree Malone property for the continuity of the rail trail system, but the construction plans show a project that ignores that advice and which contradicts the safety principles of safe, open, and not fenced. Instead, the plans show a 400-foot long chute, not a park, not an open pathway, but just a 12-foot wide corridor with 8-foot tall fences on both sides, longer than a football field, with no way on or off that path. Eminent domain will be a burdensome process, both for the city and our 132 property owners and more than 100 mortgage companies. It will cost the city hundreds of thousands of dollars, including tens of thousands of dollars for legal fees and condemnation expenses. We suggest this is hardly a justifiable use of public funds, especially when the engineers have identified 2 other routes which avoid our property altogether. Councilmember Mesa has informed his neighbors at Peachtree Malone Lofts that he will recuse himself from this issue because he's a new resident of Peachtree Malone Lofts. Even so, if you vote to condemn, he will be paid his share of the money the city will pay, and his condominium association will be paid also. Yet even this potential conflict can be avoided by simply redesigning to one of the other routes. So understanding that Councilmember Mesa won't be voting on this, the issue may be decided by you, the remaining 4 council members, Mr. Mayor as well. Mayor Mock, we live in Shambly because we love this city. We want to see Shambly continue to develop. We love the rail trail and the vision for the town center. But condemning our property is not necessary. It cannot be justified to our 132 property owners. Let's bring this matter out into the open and have a public discussion about it and about the hundreds of thousands of dollars which would be expended. Citizens deserve to know the cost of this undertaking and who is voting to condemn their personal private property and why. Peachtree Malone Lofts did not initiate this. We would prefer to avoid the whole issue. We would prefer the city use those funds for other valuable investments. The engineers identified the alternate routes around our property, and the leadership team recommended to avoid our property. We are simply asking the city to redesign this segment of the rail trail path accordingly and cease consideration of eminent domain condemnation against the owners at Peachtree Malone Lofts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Anyone else wishing to address council this evening? Seeing no one, I believe, John, we have an executive session to discuss legal issues?
Legal matters and property acquisition.
A motion to go into executive session to discuss legal matters and property. Is that real estate?
Real estate.
Okay.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to go into executive session. All in favor? All right, we will recuse ourselves for just a few moments and step out, and then we will come back in and close out the meeting.
executive session.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to exit executive session. All in favor? Very good.
Motion to suspend the rules to add an item to the agenda?
Second.
Have a motion and a second to suspend the rules to add an item to the agenda. All in favor? That's unanimous. And then we need a motion to add, let's see,
I'll make a motion to add an item to the agenda of the meeting.
we need a motion to, what item would you like to add to the agenda?
All right, I'd like to add a motion to authorize the use of eminent domain to acquire property for public use located in the city of Shambly in land lot 299 of the 18th District of Dekalb County, Georgia.
Very good. We have a motion to, if we have a motion and a second to add the item to the agenda, which is a resolution to authorize the use of eminent domain. All in favor? That's unanimous. And then we would ask the city attorney if you would please read the resolution. In total.
Okay. A resolution to authorize the use of eminent domain to acquire property for public use located in the city of Shambly in land lot 299 of the 18th District of Dekalb County, Georgia. Whereas the city of Shambly is primed to grow into a local and regional live, work, play destination, and currently the area presents ongoing challenges to developing a walkable, bikeable environment because of the constraints of the existing built environment, existing structures of historic interest, railroad and MARTA lines, and established infrastructure contribute to the context of the area studied. And whereas a 2000 Livable City Initiative study identified the possibility of a multi-use trail for City of Shambly residents along the abandoned Roswell Road corridor, and whereas the City of Shambly constructed the first segment of the trail shortly thereafter connecting Walmart to Keswick Park, and whereas a 2012 Livable City Initiative study identified the extension of the Keswick Trail along an abandoned rail corridor as a possible multi-use trail for City of Shambly residents, and whereas in June of 2015, the City of Shambly hired a design team to prepare a conceptual design study for the section of the corridor, and whereas in the first quarter of 2017, the city initiated a project to develop the Peachtree Road streetscape design to determine the best solutions for the roadway, sidewalk, and amenities along the Peachtree Road corridor in the heart of downtown Shambly, as well as the extensions of the Shambly Rail Trail, a multi-use trail for pedestrians and cyclists that currently connects Keswick Park to the Mid-City District. And whereas the existing rail trail is a tremendous amenity for the Shambly community that is somewhat underutilized as a result of its infancy and lack of current connectivity to other amenities, the current length of the trail is approximately 0.6 miles long, and the city's intent is to add an additional 0.9 miles. And whereas segment 4 of the rail trail will run behind the Peachtree Malone Loft and cross Malone Drive at the southern property line of the North Dekalb Senior Center with an all-trail and sidewalk crossing and a raised crosswalk across Malone Drive to keep the elevation continuous for the pedestrians. And whereas Condemnor needs to acquire 2 permanent easement tracts totaling 5,512 square feet, together with 3 temporary construction easement tracts totaling 11,816 square feet from condemnee, which property is further described in a legal description and survey attached hereto as Exhibit A. And whereas the city obtained a fair market value appraisal of the subject property in order to offer the owners fair market value for the real property rights needed for the project, and whereas the city's offer of appraised fair market value to purchase the property was unsuccessful, whereas the city has attempted to negotiate a purchase of the subject property from the owners, but such efforts have been unsuccessful, and whereas use of the subject property for the possession, occupation, or use of the land by the general public or by state or local government entities constitutes public use within the meaning of OCGA Section 22-1-1 et sec. And whereas the city has funds available to pay just compensation to the owner for the subject property. Excuse me. And whereas the city has made and will continue to make every reasonable effort to acquire the subject property expeditiously by negotiation, And whereas to date, the city has been unable to reach an agreement with the owner of the subject property to acquire the subject property, and whereas the city commission deems it in the public interest to acquire fee simple title to the subject property. Now therefore be it resolved by the city commission of the city of Chamblee, Georgia as follows. The city attorney and/or other attorneys designated by him are authorized to acquire the subject property on behalf of the city through the use of eminent domain by any method allowed by law. The mayor and city manager are each specifically authorized to execute any documents necessary to further the filing of any petition related to such use of eminent domain. And then the next is the Exhibit A, which is the legal description of the easement.
That it?
That's it.
Do I have a motion on this item?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the use of eminent domain as read by the city attorney.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the resolution to authorize the use of eminent domain as read by the city attorney. All in favor? Yeah. Do we have any discussion on this item? All right. Sorry about that. I always get ahead of myself. We have a motion and a second to approve the resolution to authorize the use of eminent domain as read by the city attorney. All in favor? Very good. That's unanimous. All right. That's it, guys. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor? Very good. Thank you.